Hello everyone, my name is Alexander Lee and I am the Content and Community Manager at BR Capital. And today I have a really interesting guest with me, CEO and founder of Immunefi, Mitchell Amador. Immunefi is the world's leading bug bounty platform for decentralized finance. Mitchell, before we begin, I would like to ask you, because I like asking this question to everyone who is in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, what initially brought you to the space? Like, when did you first hear about Bitcoin, and what brought you to the space? If you could just give us a timeline.
Sure. I was brought into this space, originally with the Ron Paul community in 2011.
Okay.
2011, 2012, back when I was in college. I was just some poor kid. And I was some poor kid who was looking to understand, how does one make it in the world? How does one get out of poverty? Which is where, my place in life. I was pursuing higher education to the best of my ability. And, things didn't really make sense. I didn't really understand what was going on. And through political communities, oddly enough, both on the left and right, I was introduced to Bitcoin. And I was like, wow, this stuff's crazy. I don't really understand what's going on. It seems pretty complicated, but it was very clear to me that we could use this to build new kinds of social systems that are quite distinct from the old ones, where social stratification and strict hierarchies are just the de facto position, almost impossible to stop due to the incentives involved. So that's what pulled me into crypto ultimately, this idea that we could use blockchains as the infrastructure layer of better social organizations, right? Better designed systems for human beings. And that need came out of my own poverty.
And what did you study in school?
I was studying political philosophy. Political philosophy was the big one, and political science.
And did you have any programming background?
None.
No, and
none whatsoever.
All self-taught.
Wow, that's a separate question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm self-taught in most things in my life.
That's awesome.
I'm afraid university education does not properly prepare oneself for the wonders of crypto.
For sure. I mean, that's sort of like, I'm studying international relations, but I'm also super interested in smart contract development. And so I'm the moderator of the Russian blockchain developer community. And all these developers, they ask me, so how do we get started? We're already a developer in Python or some, whatever. And we want to get into crypto and smart contracts, blockchain development. And I don't feel like I'm the most qualified person to answer this question, although I've played around with Solidity smart contracts. But what is the advice you'd give to someone who's a developer and they want to transition into smart contract development?
That's a good question. Set clear expectations. I'm hardly a fantastic developer myself. It's not my specialty. Just more on the operational and the business side. But every day I get asked this question. Every day I deal with this question. Every day, we're finding new WebSec professionals typically, or different kinds of AppSec or mobile security professionals who are looking to move into blockchain. And so we deal with it quite frequently. The best way to get into blockchain is to focus on the basics. So go read Mastering Bitcoin, go read Mastering Ethereum, understand how the blockchain works at a pretty fine level. Once you do that and you have those basics to the point of intuition, and they're not really that complicated, then you want to move to the EVM. Okay, how do I understand the EVM? It has a whole bunch of quirks and components, and it can be hard to find out what those are. So you want to make sure that you know it back to front as best you can. There's no, it's not complex to do that. You really just have to go through the grind of studying the EVM, reading the documentation, playing around with stuff. That will be sufficient. Once you have a firm foundation in those two things, you want to move to the next stage, which is maybe you're playing with crypto zombies or some kind of small experimental game in order to get a feel for what Solidity is like. Right? At that point, you're in the game. And you'll find, especially if you have a web a WebSec background or an AppSec background, that it's quite a smooth transition. As long as you focused on understanding how the blockchain molds how the EVM must work and how it kind of determines what you can construct and how you might do that, then it's all quite intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a smooth transition.
Would you recommend like people learn just Solidity, or like do you I mean, I'm personally like an Ethereum maximalist. I think that it's just like the future, and it's like it sort of clouds my judgment because I'm like all in on Ethereum. But should we learn like should people learn like Haskell and like Rust and all these other like there's other SDKs for like, other languages to program smart contracts in these other languages? Like should developers of smart contracts just focus on Solidity, or do you need to learn like everything, like all languages?
Well, you never need to learn all languages. Yeah, that's kind of a tricky question. If you want to be great at doing smart contract work, you should firmly understand, all the technology and building layers that you're working with. And from there, what language you use is kind of a moot point. You'll use Solidity because that's what's available. It's on the world's dominant blockchain. But you'll be reasonably well equipped if you want to use Rust and build something on Substrate, or you want to build something on Solana or whatever. If you want to migrate to a different ecosystem, as long as you understand how the building blocks beneath it work, making that transition is not so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you have this whole generation of Ethereum devs that are like Solidity guys, and that was the only thing they ever did. And I don't think that's necessarily good. That's a whole generation of young developers who did not pick up the lessons of previous generations. They didn't learn how to, set up their development pipelines or organize engineering teams or, have contingency plans. There's a lot of things they missed because they were never in a more mature engineering organization to pick up all of those mores and cultures and trade-offs. Like, when might you use one language rather than another? Instead, they just learned Solidity. They only ever did things on Ethereum. That is not ideal in terms of becoming or encouraging the development of high-quality devs, because they have such a tunnel vision about what they think is possible. Much better to have broad experience and scope and familiarity with many tools.
And my question is like what percentage of smart contracts are in Solidity on Immunefi? Like what percentage of projects are like Ethereum-based projects that are on Immunefi?
That's impossible. I have no idea, to be quite honest.
But like the majority,
how many
or
contracts? It depends what the real question is, right? Like what percentage of contracts? There have been so many contracts, most of which are dead and nothing happens in them on Ethereum today. If you mean what percentage of projects, okay, well, that's a different question, right? Or if you say what percentage of TVL, that's a different question. Like there's $100 billion in TVL today, and Immunefi we protect around $40 billion of that, across both Ethereum and other chains. So does that mean 40% of projects are on Immunefi today? Well, not exactly. That means 40% of the assets are covered and protected by our programs. But there's a power weighting, right? One compound makes up $9 billion, whereas your average project, your NFT project, might not even register. It has no TVL effectively. So how you calculate that is a tricky thing. The only thing to say is a lot of projects are on Immunefi.
Like, could you just like tell me a little bit more about Immunefi? Like, how did you get the inspiration to found and create Immunefi? What was the moment like that you were like, okay, this is like a need of the community, and you like decided, okay, I'm going to create this project?
Sure. Well, the need. I had a lot of money in certain contracts, a lot for me, anyways, early last year, and there were some security events that were going on. And for those of us who have followed, the centralized exchange security patterns or have been following smart contract security since the DAO hack or earlier, we've been familiar with the kind of adversarial nature of the environment for some time. Like every year since crypto came to prominence and became a multi-billion-dollar space, we've been seeing exchange hacks where hundreds of millions of dollars conservatively were stolen. Probably billions of dollars in reality. Like the Bitfinex hack, of course, is like a multiple $billion hack now. You know, the Mt. Gox hack is an infinity $1 billion hack now. A great many other exchanges have been hacked in the meantime. All this stuff has been on my mind, working through the years, seeing these attacks as they happen, trying to defend against them where they can, because most projects face these kinds of security risks. So when I had some cash in some of these DeFi contracts, I was antsy. I didn't even have the benefit of understanding what the security posture is or the landscape was. But what I knew is, or what I knew was, I should say, was that if anything had just gone a little bit wrong, if that code had some minor errors, my money would vanish. And I was really unhappy with that. I wanted to fix that. I needed to fix that. So I went to go and find out how. And at the end of that process, I realized, or I thought, and I believe, that bug bounties were the best possible solution for protecting mainnet contracts and their funds.
And what do you see as like the evolution of Immunefi? Like, how will Immunefi evolve the space? I talked to Vlad a little bit. I think he's your community manager at Immunefi, if I'm not mistaken. And he was telling me a little bit about like the future of Immunefi. But if I could just hear it from you, like what is the future? Is it going to be, is Immunefi itself going to be like more decentralized, maybe turn into like a DAO or like how? What,
more or less.
more or less.
You know, the end game for what we're building is the permissionless emergency response layer for all of DeFi and crypto. Access to a large pool of extremely professional and incentivized labor, you know, who has the motivation and the skills to go out and protect these projects. Instant communication lines to all of these projects in a permissionless interface, such that, you know, this routing, this plumbing for all the projects to the security resource can never be interfered with and is always in their control. Today, you know, we built out all this infrastructure already, but we built it as a company. We built it as a product that we own. And where we're going next is, okay, how can we start decentralizing this piece by piece now that we understand the product nuances, the trade-offs, the different challenges, the issues in the workflow that can come up? What are the solutions we need to solve those? Now that we understand those, we're starting to create on-chain infrastructure for every part of the workflow piece by piece, so that at the end state, you have this permissionless network of cybersecurity expertise that is 100% dedicated to protecting the space and has all the plumbing, has all the connections, and has all the social expectations they need to make this work make sense for all parties. So that's where things are going, right? We see ourselves being this core piece of plumbing for every single DeFi project in the space with regards to bug bounties and security.
I mean, Immunefi, like personally, I think it's one of the most interesting projects that I've seen in the space in a long time. And I think because it plays such an important role to making the whole DeFi ecosystem more resilient to attacks, more and protecting assets of people, of users and individuals who have their money in DeFi protocols. So that's why I see Immunefi as just this integral part to the whole system of just blockchain as, you know, community, and also just DeFi. So yeah, that's just like it. I don't know. Immunefi is a really cool project. I don't know, but I was going to ask you. So yeah, and this is why I think Immunefi plays a really big role in making DeFi more mainstream for people in the space who are like always thinking about cryptocurrency, and if you're you know in the space, DeFi is here to stay. But for someone who's never used crypto, or you know just kind of dismisses it, I think Immunefi can help bring more trust to DeFi for just the average person who knows nothing about cryptocurrency and, you know, DeFi protocols. So like, what do you think is like Immunefi's role? If you could just like sum it up in like a few sentences, what is Immunefi's role? I see it as bringing more trust and transparency to the DeFi space. But like, what do you think? What is Immunefi's role?
It depends on the perspective, right? So, like the immediate layer is we bring security and safety, which is just by having the emergency disclosure capability and having all the expertise around that to make sure it goes well. If we have so much expertise on the team that we can navigate just about any kind of dispute or situation like that to a positive outcome, or at least know how it was done before. Obviously, there's things we've never done before. We'll just have to try our best, but we have the memory of it insofar as it can be had. That's how a project will typically think about it, the safety of it. But then you have how might a retail user think about it? Well, for them, we are key to this, like you said, trust and transparency. We are looking after their interests. Since we, even if they're not sure about what the project will do, they know what we will do. We have one job, which is to protect their money and to be very clear and explicit about it when we do it, to be very transparent about it when we do it. So that's what we'll do. The institutions, there's a third thing, right? With them, now there's a marker of safety and legitimacy. We make DeFi safer in the compliance sense, in the justification sense for your stakeholders. They could never go into some asset that is run by a bunch of anons with no safeguards. But if Immunefi comes in and says, yes, we're working with this project. Yes, the bug bounty program is legit. Yes, they've paid out. Yes, they've conducted themselves well. Well, that's a point they can say and be like, well, if these guys who specialize in doing this kind of protective work are vouching for this project's security policy, then we can deal with them in a way that we couldn't do before. Mm-hmm. So what Immunefi means, or what it facilitates, is different to different parts of the market. Does that add any color?
Yeah, definitely. Another question I have is, what are the biggest hacks that you think Immunefi has prevented? Like, what are the biggest payouts on Immunefi, and what are some things that like already Immunefi has like made a big difference in preventing hacks?
That really depends on how you view the impact of hacks. So there's two reasonable ways to look at it. One is the cash value that could have been stolen. Mm-hmm. And the other is the aggregate economic damage that could have been done. So let's take an example, where you can see two flip sides of this to understand that, calculating it is pretty hard. So we worked with a project called ArmorFi, and they were our first really big bounty, and they was the first really big payout. Within 24 hours, a critical vulnerability was found that would have led to the theft of the entirety of the insurance pool. Mm-hmm. There was a very minor mistake in the code, but it would have allowed whoever made the first claim to take all of the money. Now there's $26 million there. So we can say for sure we saved $26 million in hard cash that day. But, well, the protocol was valued at, $800 million at the time? Mm-hmm. And if that event had happened, it would likely have destroyed the value of the entire thing. So what do we save? Do we save $26 million? Or did we save, well, typically the loss in this kind of case is between 50 and 70% of the value of the protocol. Do we save 400 to 500 million in aggregate economic value? Which one do we want to look at?
Or the repercussions after that. Like people will be like, well, I'm not going to use any DeFi protocol, or specifically that protocol. Right. And years down the line, it could still be playing out. So
precisely.
Yeah.
Precisely. So you got examples like that, but then you also have examples that are much more explicit. Like we have our second major Fei critical vulnerability. And that one had about $230 million at risk. Mm-hmm. Would have been about double that if there was more ETH available for flash loans. But the attack pattern maxed out all available flash loans in the Ethereum ecosystem. So it capped out about $230 million in a single move. Right? And that's hard cash that could have been stolen. Mm-hmm. Right there and then.
I was watching one of your videos on the Immunefi YouTube channel this morning, and just the depth. I think it was someone. I don't know if it was someone from Immunefi, but they were going into depth about like there was some DAI stolen from Pickle Finance. I'm not sure if that's the name, yeah. And just tracing where it went, and that was super interesting. Just going going into depth about that. So yeah, I mean, it's like DeFi, the fact that it's not like hackers and users are both brought to DeFi for similar reasons, because I mean, there's no KYC for these exchanges. But at the same time, like for someone who doesn't want KYC, just a person who's just following the rules, not a hacker, that draws them to DeFi. But the same reasons that someone who's doing some more illicit things, hacking, that also brings them to DeFi. So the DeFi space is super interesting. Like, how do you see it evolving? Honestly, like, do you see it? Is it here to stay? Are we gonna have more of like in the future, we'll be able to trade like actual stocks on like these decentralized exchanges? Where do you see the DeFi space itself headed in 2, 5+ years?
That is a difficult question to
Very
answer.
difficult. Yeah. But just what do you think? Like,
I mean, I think there are some things that are very obvious, right? DeFi is going to stick around, and there's going to be a new KYC compliance layer that is added to a lot of projects. I think that is inevitable, that there are such incentives to drive that outcome that it's going to happen one way or another. I can't tell you if that'll be the move that wins, right? DeFi in the classic sense, without those restrictions, is still booming so much. And the weaker and weaker Western financial systems become, due to the consequences of their own economic stagnation. The weaker and weaker they become, the more the appeal of DeFi presents itself. Western economies have become increasingly financialized to the point that it takes like financial activity and financial firms occupy a huge percentage of the major Western economies. I'm looking at Canada, the US, the UK, Switzerland, Germany, and what would be the other big one? Australia, Singapore, huge percentage of the activity there. And DeFi is like the end-all, be-all version of that. Permissionless markets, liquidity that can move anytime, anywhere without restriction to any product. It's hard to say if that will end up ruling the modern financial ecosystem just due to the weight of the power of those network effects. I don't know if it will end up being more important than a permissioned compliance layer of DeFi, but I know that it's going to be in the running. It's in competition.
Yeah, just observing the whole macroeconomic trend of the past, 2020 was pretty insane, and this year as well. Just like I was in the U.S. and just seeing like the effect of like housing prices have just shot through the roof. The real estate is just insane, and then just the money printing. It's like something like 400% increase of M1 money supply, and like my question is like, do you think like is it inevitable that the dollar is just on the decline and we're going to find like the world's next reserve currency is going to be something else? But my question is, do you think it's going to be crypto? Do you think it's going to be, or is it going to be another fiat currency by some, government?
I have no idea. That's really a political question, right? Are we going to have SDRs in some particular form? This basket of major currencies, the euro, the dollar, Swiss francs, yuan. Are we going to have this basket of currencies as the next reserve currency? Or are we going to have Bitcoin or something similar, or some combination of the above? I think it's unpredictable, but it's, crypto is definitely in the runnings. People notice it. Anybody who's been watching, for example, China or Russia knows that they've been buying up gold for the last 10 years. And over the last 3 to 4 years, that pace has accelerated dramatically, and they're just pouring cash in expectation of some kind of major currency move. And what we're building in crypto, especially with assets like Bitcoin and ETH, kind of serve a number of those characteristics. The only thing is they don't have political buy-in. That could change on a dime.
You think so?
The world suddenly becomes a very different place.
You think it's a possibility that a government decides to like have some sort of ERC20 token on, Ethereum blockchain that becomes like their currency, and then Ethereum sort of becomes tied to like a government?
I don't know how it could be done, but I think that when you have, I think crypto in its present form is a uniquely advantageous tool to, or potentially uniquely advantageous tool to Western governments in a way that, Eastern ones can't deal with. The Russians and the Chinese have these, very strong economies in some senses, but they have a lot of restrictions on what's
Hmm.
going on, and they're not comfortable with things they can't control. Now, that's why, for one reason or another, crypto stuff is largely off limits. Like, you can't have a major crypto operation in Russia, and you can't do that in China, certainly not, because it's kind of unpredictable. The West hasn't really embraced it, but they've allowed it. But if we were to embrace, DeFi and some of these technologies, then there would be all these benefits in kind of being the first movers and pushing and propelling these technologies, such that eventually all these other governments have no choice but to participate in this vast global market that is underpinned by crypto. And if that is the case, then whether our governments thought about it or not, they have essentially thrown their lot in with whatever those underlying reserve assets are, such as Bitcoin if we're using that network, or Ethereum if we're using that one. And suddenly, these become very important assets from the perspective of a central bank's balance sheet, just because of the geopolitical choice or the strategic economic choice that these governments have made to align themselves with this technology and to leverage it to achieve their aims.
Hmm.
And we do have that potential. So if that happens, then then it's like there's this huge quantum shift in finance,
Hmm.
because you suddenly have all this political force that's encouraging the adoption of blockchain technology, and everything that we're doing now is but drops in the bucket compared to the level of activity that could come then. And that's what Immunefi is really building for,
Hmm.
I should
For
add.
sure, yeah.
And we're building for trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars coming into the space and nobody knowing how to secure it. And so we need to lock down bug bounties so that everyone can get the best
Hmm.
quality protection without having to know how to do it.
And I've looked at your, like, you guys have a lot of openings right now at Immunefi. If you could just talk about, like, what is, if someone comes across this video and is like, this is a really cool project, Immunefi, like, who do you need most right now? What kind of smart contract auditors, community managers, I don't know, who do you need?
Sure. Well, I could definitely, use some more smart contract engineers or security analysts. We have literally the world's most interesting DeFi security problems, the most challenging and, let's say, impactful computer science programs and problems in the history of the world. And I would love more fantastic developers and engineers to come and join me solve them. So if that's you, check us out at immunefi.com and sign up. We're very interested in working with you.
And final question is, if you have any advice to young people who want to start a company, who want to join the blockchain space, DeFi space, what is just very general, not even like programming advice or like what you should learn, but just like key characteristics. So like what should you focus on? Just advice to young people.
Sure. The two pieces of advice that I would prioritize would be, number one is patience and persistence over long periods of time. If you're willing to spend 5 years building a skill, the likelihood that you'll succeed goes up dramatically, and the likelihood that you'll be so far ahead of everyone else is also much higher, because almost nobody invests 5 years in doing anything, and learning anything in particular is not particularly hard. What's difficult is just building up the whole network of knowledge that makes each individual part make more sense and have the context and the color. If you have years to do it, suddenly all of this becomes very achievable.
Mm-hmm.
That's the path to mastery over anything. If you have that attitude, whether you're after DeFi, whether you're trying to build a business, whether you're trying to master a particular subject, such as political science or international relations, then you are equipped to succeed, whatever your goal. The second thing, of course, is plain vanilla integrity. Everyone in the world is in this state of anxiety and uncertainty. We're all looking for who we can trust, who we want to stick with in this confusing and unpredictable life. And people who have integrity, who can be trusted for the words they say and act consistently, are exactly the people we all want to be around. Both because we can trust them and rely on them and have faith in them, and because they make life more meaningful and more satisfying and more rewarding. So if you have that, and you have mastery, or that commitment, then not only will you achieve what you want, but everyone else will be sure to do whatever they can to help you get there. I think that's a nice combination. It should be generally useful for people.
Well, Mitchell, thank you so much for your time. This is a really interesting conversation, and I'm really looking forward to see what Immunefi does in the future because it's such a cool project that you're working on. So, wishing you the best of luck with Immunefi.
Thanks, Alexander. Much appreciated. You guys have yourself a great day. See you later.
All right. I think we'll just cut the video there. But thank you so much. Again, this is.